The first thing I suppose to say is that as a school, the aim of our GCSE is very much like the aim of our Key Stage 3 curriculum, which is to make sure that we have a broad and balanced curriculum. We're not a school that is going to push students down a certain route or insist that they take a certain combination of subjects, but we want to make sure that actually students get an element of choice. Now, they can't have the free choice to choose exactly what they want. There are some subjects which all students have to take. But within that, we want to make sure there are options, there are choices for students, so they can choose what they are passionate about, what they're good at, and what will help lead them to success in the future. Well, success in taking their GCSEs, but on moving on, progressing to what they want to do. And it should be the most appropriate course for the individual student. And I'll come back to that in a bit. So the bit that all students have to do, and this is where on Monday we had a few groans and a few sort of rolling of eyes as they realised that actually, yes, you've still got to do English, maths and science. They are obviously the core 3 subjects. In English, you do literature and language. They're taught within the same class by the same teacher, sort of in the modular approach. In maths, obviously, they'll continue to study it. Science, all students must take science. There is an element of choice within science, which I'll come back to later, but all students do take some science. And then all students take religious studies. I'll pause on that one for a second, because I know sometimes that's one that raises questions as to why all students have to take religious studies. First thing, it's worth noting that nationally, religious studies is compulsory subject for all students at Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4. So whatever school you go to, you'll have to do some element of religious studies. As a church school, we believe it also has a high importance to our students in getting them to question and to explore some of the bigger questions of life. And seeing as they're doing the course anyway, it makes sense to us that they then get a qualification for it, rather than doing 2 years of work and then gaining nothing from it at the end, which is why all students do take the GCSE. The bottom one is games and PSHE. It sounds very exciting, I know, but games is core PE. We just rebrand it to differentiate it from GCSE PE. And then PSHE, for those who aren't aware, is when we're studying things like our drugs and sex education, when we're looking at safety and welfare, when we're looking at careers education and finance education. Those wider bits of the curriculum which aren't assessed, there's no exam in it, but are an equally important part of what we teach. And as a Key Stage 3, they're taught within the religious studies classes. So that's what all students will take. Then there's a slight difference depending on the nature of the students in question. So I'm going to talk through, there are 3 different offers that we give to students, and it's hopeful that your child's gone home to you and knows which offer they're on. It's contained in their options booklet. If they haven't been able to find the information, it's on, I think, page 4, halfway down, and it'll either say that they're on the core offer, the guided pathway, or supported study. If you're not sure which they are, please do ask them, and then if they still don't know, please do come and ask myself, and I will let you know. Before I do explain that, there's one other thing that I think I'd like to raise, and that's the EBAC, or the English Baccalaureate. So this is a qualification, already a suite of qualifications that the government have said is a really important, because it shows that broad and balanced curriculum. It shows the breadth of knowledge and skills that our students may have acquired over Key Stage 4. You don't get a certificate for it. It's not like you come on results day and you get your certificates for your GCSEs and then you get your EBAC certificate. The idea is that actually if you've studied and successfully passed GCSEs in these 5 subjects, then what you are showing is you're not just somebody who's good in one aspect of the curriculum, you're somebody who's good across the academic curriculum, and therefore that is seen as more positive by future employers or universities, etc. Now, it's not for every student, and at no point are we saying that every student has to do the EBAC. What we are saying is we'd like you all to consider whether or not you do EBAC subjects. As I said, they're seen as being facilitated, as opening doors for the future, but it's up to you with your child as to whether that's the right path for them. And it isn't for some, but it is for many. So the core offer. For the vast majority of our students, 75% of our students will be on the core offer. This is decided based on the data we have on them. Now this year, that's been a harder task than in previous years, because this year we have no Key Stage 2 data for your child, because obviously they didn't do the SAT tests because of COVID. But what we do have is a range of other data in school. We have primarily their progress in subjects at the moment, how they're doing in their subjects for the last 2.5 years. That is the biggest measure, because that's what we can see on a day-to-day basis. Hopefully, we know your child well enough to be able to assess how they're doing and make a decision based on that. We also have their CAT data, which they did in Year 7, and their reading data, which was done in Year 7 and then repeated in Year 9. So that gives us the information we go on, and from that we'll decide whether or not they fit the core offer. Now, there's always someone who then says, actually, do you know what, I think you've put my child on the wrong offer. And if that's you and you're concerned about it, please do come and talk to us about it. Mr. Brooks, Mrs. Cronin and myself will hang around at the end of the talk. Please do come and talk to us. It may be that actually, you know, we realise we have, or it may be once we've talked you through why they're on the offer that they're on, then you'll understand and that will be fine. But do come and talk to us about it. But for the majority of students, as I say, 75% will be on the core offer. So what does that mean? Well, they get a broad choice, as we'd hope all students do. They have to choose 3 options, but they have to do a language. Now, that can be French, German, or Spanish. It's up to them. Obviously, it's got to be one they're currently studying. They can't decide to choose a new one because they've been doing Spanish and French for 2 or 3 years, and suddenly they think, actually, I don't like those. I'm going to give German a quick try. It's got to be one of the subjects they're already studying, but they have to do a language. If you remember back to my last slide, you remember that to do the EBAC, you have to do English, maths, science and language, and a humanities. So it may be they want to do a humanities, but they don't have to. It's not compulsory. So humanities is an option. It's not compulsory. What is compulsory for the students are the ones that I've been through. And then they get 3 free choices. Any 3 choices. I think there's one restriction, which is you can't do sports studies and PE because there's too much overlap between them. But other than that, their world's their oyster. They can choose what they want to do. And we'll think a bit about how they might make that choice in a bit. So that's the majority. It might be your child, however, is on the guided offer. So if they're on the guided offer, that generally means they're struggling in their languages course. And therefore, we feel that actually to continue to do a language is going to be to their detriment. They're not going to probably be successful in languages, and therefore they're on the guided offer. Now again, that you may feel that isn't true, and that we're happy to have that conversation. If I had one with a parent just earlier who's actually they're passionate about languages, yes, they find it difficult, but they really want to do it. That's fine. We're not saying you can't. We're putting the guided because we're suggesting that might not be the best path for them. So because they don't have to do a language, what they have to do instead is a humanities. So it's compulsory humanities. And in this case, by humanities, we mean history or geography. They can do both. It's a myth, I think, was circulating around Year 9 this year, that you can either do history or geography, you can't do both. And that's not true. If they're particularly good at humanities, they can do both. I did both when I was at school and would highly recommend it if you enjoy humanities. There are some subjects that we would suggest that they don't do. Now again, it's just a suggestion. We're not saying they can't. And the reason for that is those subjects require a certain level of ability in other subjects in order to achieve them. And they are, I'll put them in a list in a second, but they are computer science, economics, languages, and triple science. And those are the ones we will be cautious about them doing. Now again, that doesn't mean to say they can't. It might be, for example, the reason they're on the guided pathway is just because they're not very good at language. They struggle with their languages, but they're brilliant at coding, and they really want to do computer science. That's fine. We're not saying they can't. We're just saying think carefully before choosing those subjects, because they may be a bit hard to access based on their ability level. But again, the 3 options are choices, they're options. We're not saying you can't do things. Then we have a few students who are on the supported offer or supported study. What that means is, again, knowing your child, knowing how well they're doing, we feel actually they're going to struggle a bit more with their English and maths, and they need a bit of extra support with that. Rather than doing the full suite, actually, we say they do 1 less or 1 fewer GCSE, and therefore that time is used for what we call supported study, where they're given extra maths, extra English tuition, and some general study skills work that goes alongside that. Therefore, if you're on the supported offer, They do a compulsory humanities, a history or geography, like the guided offer, but that just leaves 2 options. Now, I know for some that can feel a bit disappointing. You know, they wanted to do 3 options. Why do I only get to do 2 if I'm on supported study? But really, it is about not overburdening those students. If they're doing the full 10 and they're needing the support, that can be too much. So it's about giving the appropriate support for those students. That's a small number of students, but if that is your child, then hopefully you feel that's the right thing for them. Again, if you don't, please do come and talk to us. So I appreciate there's a lot to go through there, but just a very quick recap. Core offer, you have to do language. You've got 3 other choices. Guided choice, you have to do a humanities, 3 other choices, although some suggested ones. And supported offer, 2 choices. You've got to do a humanities and a supported study. And then again, just be careful with the choices. So these are the subjects that we offer. Hopefully you're aware of most of these. Hopefully you've had a chance to look around and go and see most of these. And I would encourage you to go and see them, particularly the new ones. Go and find out about them. You know, we often get some students, I remember a few years ago, talked to a student who was doing business studies, and she hated business studies. So I said to her, why did you choose it? And the reason she chose it was new. She didn't like anything she was studying already in our school, therefore she thought it was new. It's got to be good. But actually it turns out to be nothing like what she thought it was going to be. So the new subjects can be exciting, but they're not for everyone. So go and find out about them if you haven't already done so. So we've got a range of GCSEs on there. I've already said you can't do PE and sports studies, but you can do one. If you want to know the difference between them, again, go down to PE and they'll be able to tell you more than I will about that. A couple of things I just point out about this. So first of all, you can do more than 1 language. If your child is particularly good at languages, they're not limited to 1. They can do 2 if they wish to. And we have a small number each year that do that, and we have an even smaller, but we do have some students each year that go on to do 2 languages at A level, and then most of those that go on to do languages at a degree level. So it is the right route for some students. The other thing to point out is the difference between triple science and core science, or what we call double science. So all students do science. They'll do all 3 disciplines, but they get 2 GCSEs for it. So it's called a dual award. At the end of the day, they sit the exams, it's calculated together, and they get 2 GCSEs. If they're particularly passionate about science, they can do triple science. Now, some of you may have been up to science and they will have told you the difference, but in the end, what they've got to look at is, are they really love science? Is it something they really want to do? Because if you take triple science, you're going to be doing science every day. And for some students, that's just like the worst thing in the world. For other students, that sounds brilliant. Science every day. It's got to be what they're passionate about. What it does mean is you do 1 less of your other options. It counts as an option if you're doing the triple, because you've got the double, you need the extra time to then do the extra disciplines to do the triple. So it's important to think that through before making a decision. It's also worth saying that we appreciate that it's a difficult decision, and students change their mind. So if your child changes their mind between now and September, that's generally not a problem. There's always the chance that groups might be full, having built the timetable, so the earlier they do that, the better, but we will try to accommodate them as much as possible. If they change their mind in the first couple of weeks of September, that's generally not a problem. Hopefully we can make that change quite easy. It might mean changing some groups around. If they make that change later on in September into October, then it isn't possible for us to do it normally, because by that point, the amount of time they've missed, the catch-up, actually, it's really difficult for students to do well. So by the time we get to the end of September, really, they need to be sticking to what they've chosen. That's why it's so important now to make sure we've thought through the process and to ask for help and to talk to people about it. So I shared this with the students on Monday, so who will help? Obviously, you guys will help. As parents and carers, you're here to help your students. But I did put a slight caveat to the students on Monday, and I would reiterate it in the room. Just because as parents, we love the subject when we were at school and we think it's the best thing, doesn't necessarily mean it's the right thing for our children to study. And every year you get somebody who says, why did you say that? Well, my mum said I had to, or my dad made me. That's not the best reason to choose a subject. Yes, we want to try and persuade our children to make the right choice, but in the end, it have to be what's right for them. They've got their tutor in school who will happily talk to them, advise them. Their subject teachers who hopefully You've spoken to some of those this evening, but if not, Parents' Evening is coming up, a great chance to talk to your subject teacher and to find out, actually, is this a subject they think that your child will do well in at GCSE? Again, a slight caveat, it's worth bearing in mind that we are all biased as teachers. We all love our subject. We can't understand why anybody wouldn't love our subject. I mean, why would they not want to study something that you've spent your entire career, teaching? Therefore, there is that inherent bias within teachers, and that needs to be borne in mind. So there are some independent people. So Ms. Taylor, who's outside by our career stall, is our careers advisor. She doesn't teach a subject, she's a non-teaching member of staff, and therefore she is completely neutral if you want an impartial viewpoint. Mr. Brooks and Mrs. Crone are neutral as they can be, as long as you don't mention PE to Mr. Brooks. But Mrs. Crone teaches English, you've got to do it anyway, so she's a good person to come and talk to you about that. Mr. Roberts, who's not here at the moment, but he's obviously the year lead, again, will give hopefully some impartial advice. And also talk to older students, because they're the ones actually who take the subjects. They know what it's like to study the subject rather than to teach it or to be a parent and see a child go through it. Therefore, talk to them if you know them and ask them, what's it actually like? What does it mean? What's the reality of studying it on a day-to-day basis in a classroom? There are some other places you can hopefully get help. I've mentioned the option books several times. They're also available online, so if you lose the booklet or if your child's not shown it to you, you want to have a look, if you go to the options section online, those booklets are there. Tonight's the best time to find out, so please don't leave without asking any questions. No question is too stupid to ask. Please ask them. We'll be around at the end of the session. Do come and talk to us, ask us anything you want, because I'd rather we ask them than you went away and you didn't quite have the answer and then regret it. There are some videos on the school website. These were actually done during lockdown, so there might be the odd reference to COVID in them for the years when we couldn't have a face-to-face options evening. But actually we thought they were useful. They're still relevant, and therefore they're useful just as a bit of information, a reminder as to what the subjects entail, particularly for people who can't come to the evening. But if you want a little reminder or didn't get a chance to see a subject, then they're there for you. Please do look at your child's assessment point data, the data we send home and how well they're doing. If they're doing really well in a subject, that would be a good thing for them to consider. If they're doing badly in a subject, it's probably not the best thing for them to do, even if that's a subject which may be considered to, a very important subject to yourselves. And then there is some online advice. There are some links if you want some external advice in the booklets. Again, these were some reasons that I shared with the students on Monday, and just to reiterate it. So don't choose it just because your parents like the subject. I'm not trying to diminish your input in it. Please do talk to your students and do have that conversation with them. Don't do it just because siblings did it. Don't choose it just because it's new. New things can be exciting. They can also be just as uninspiring as anything else if you don't actually put the effort into wanting to learn something. Please don't let your child take a subject because they like the teacher. It's great that they like the teacher. As teachers, we like to be liked. If you're Mr. Brooks and Mrs. Crone, they're very popular teachers. If you're like me, you're not so popular. So it's great when a student says, I like the teacher. But in the end, there's no guarantees they'll get that teacher next year. There'll be several classes taught by different teachers. Therefore, if they choose it because they like the teacher and then they find they've got a different one, it's not the reason to do it. If they choose it because that teacher's inspired them in the subject this year and therefore they've loved the subject, that's great. But don't just do it in the hope that they'll get that teacher. Please don't let them ever tell you that a subject is easy. There's no such thing as an easy GCSE. It isn't that some are easy and some are harder. Some you need certain skills to access, and it'll depend on your individual child as to what they find easy. I found languages incredibly difficult when I was at school. I struggled with it. I wasn't very good at it. I found maths easy. That does not mean maths is an easier subject than languages. If I said that, I'd get lynched by the maths department. Actually, they were of equal challenge. It's just I happen to find one easier than the other. And so every child is different as to what they find easier. There's no such thing as an easy subject. And again, please make sure they don't choose a subject because their friends are choosing it. In most subjects, there are more than one class at GCSE, and those classes are defined on their option blocks, but also on a spread of numbers and a spread of making sure we've got a balance across the curriculum. There is no guarantee they will be with their friends, even if they go for exactly the same options as their friends. Please do encourage them to do what's good at, what they enjoy, consider the EBAC, again, not because it's compulsory, but something to consider. And if they do know what they want to do when they finish GCSEs, then obviously try to stay in that direction. That's not saying that we assume students will know. The vast majority of students have no idea what they want to do after GCSEs, and why should they? They're still in the early months of year 9. Suddenly the idea of what they're going to do when they've finished year 11 is miles away. Half of our year 11s don't know what they want to do next year, and they're closing in on their exams very rapidly. So, students have been given the options booklet. They'll be emailed a form, which is an online form, which they need to complete with their option choices, and the deadline for that is Monday the 13th of February, which is the Monday of half term. And that hopefully gives you time to think it through. If you get to that point and actually they still don't know, fill it in, but then send an email to the school just to say we've filled it in, but actually we're just going to be mulling it over half term, and still, if you want some more advice, please ask. It's worth saying that on the form you are asked for a reserve offer, a backup offer. That's in case we can't timetable the choices that your child makes. It's very rare. We do everything we can to, but just because of the number of option blocks and the number of different subjects, there's the odd occasion when it actually doesn't timetable, and therefore they will need a reserved offer. Don't do what some students said to me they were going to do a couple of years ago, which is not put a reserve offer down and then we couldn't make them do it. If they don't put a reserve offer down, we will have to just choose one for them, which is never something anybody wants. So make sure that they do take a reserve offer. It's highly unlikely it'll be needed, and we'll have a conversation with you if it is needed. We don't just sort of spring it on you, but it's worth there just in case. So I'm going to finish there. As I said, we'll hang around to answer any questions. Please do ask if you've got any. I hope you've enjoyed the evening so far. If you haven't been around all the subjects, please go and explore the subjects. We're here for another 45 minutes, plenty of time to see them. Thank you for coming and have a good evening.